The Maphistophalean Compact as attributed to Lawrence Haarlam. Edited by Jude Jesus. On the Damnable Visions and Epiphanes of the Deplorable Dr. Faustus. Prologue. Faustus is in his room reading the tome of Melchizedek Mephistopheles, a book which he found whilst garbage picking. The virgin martyr Saint Lucia appeared to Faustus out of the lucid light, sent to him from the divine Dame Mercy, holding both her eyes in the palms of her hands. She was clothed in fiery lithon and wore a crown of flames upon her head. Her hair was golden and her flesh like pearl or the inner part of an oyster shell. By the light of faith, she said to Faustus, God bestows upon you perseverance that you might avoid evil and zealously perform good works, abhorring nothing but the darkness of evil and sin. I bring you the tender and sublime sentiments of God's divine grace and greater honor and glory, the salvation of thy soul. The first part of the vision. Iabum in hell. Faustus is guided by John Merrick in a chariot of kaleidoscopic and sparkling light through a swirling colored mist to the mountain island in the deepest, darkest depths of hell, a pile of shit and plastic debris in the middle of an ocean of filth. It is thundering and lightning and raining acid rain. A tempest blows, rocking and pushing the chariot so that it trembles, shakes and sways. John Merrick said, I am taking you to stand before Iabum, Job, the Horite great-grandson of Nahor, brother of Abraham. Faustus could not shrink from the authoritative sternness in his charioteer's voice. They find Iabum sitting enthroned upon a great, stinking dung heap, surrounded with buzzing flies and crawling with dung beetles, or scarabs. He is scraping his boils with a shard fashioned from a piece of the broken clay. Those shards around him are from the tablets carved by Moses the lawgiver, which were broken when the exiles first broke faith with God's covenant. John Merrick said. And Iabum was sitting by a whitened skull, under the shadow of a crucifix upon which hung a golden serpent. And thereby on his left squat the devil, a cloven-hoofed monstrosity, half goat and half man. Its belly was an open cauldron filled imperishable fire, in which writhed innumerable God-damned souls in the pain of perdition. And out its dirty ass, Faustus could see, an old friar and nun pull a ghostly white soul, and it was weeping for joy, crying, I am saved. And the friar and nun were singing, Hallelujah! And on its left stood a young virgin with hairy limbs crowned with roses and myrtle, holding a sickle, and bleeding from her virgin womb, and on its right stood a skeleton, yellowed with age, leaning aside and laughing as it looked into Faustus' soul, pointing a bony finger to a broken hourglass at its feet and saying, I have all the time there is to wait for you. Faustus felt his stomach flutter and drop, his legs became as lead, and his heart seemed to stop as the offal which came out of the skeleton's grinning maw chilled him to the marrow of his soul. The ground they were standing on was crawling with biting, stinging bugs, and centipedes and hairy venomous spiders, littered with broken skulls and bones, and dusty cobwebs were everywhere. There was an open grave yawning between the skeleton and the bloody virgin, and into it the old friar and nun threw the newly born soul. It cried out, I am reborn. This is my womb, she said to Faustus. My name is Sin and I am the mother of life eternal. And Faustus stood as if one dead, a statue carved of stone, a graven image of the man he used to be, staring into the open hole as the soul was devoured by the darkness within it. See that one, said John Merrick to Faustus, pointing out one of the lost souls writhing within the cauldron of imperishable fire, that is the Roman Marcus Licinius Crassus. He thought himself the richest man to have ever lived, and he was. He is in there because he thought his fortune could buy a vestal's virtue. That one is Solomon, said John Merrick, pointing to poor lost soul with 666 branded on his forehead. He was the wealthiest man of his time. He squandered a vast fortune acquired from illegitimate taxation and polluted his lands as Nimrod did at Babel, with a never-ending immigration of Asiatics, blacks, and all the other colored mud peoples of the world, speaking a confusion of tongues and worshipping of alien gods. The innumerable licentious sluts he sodomized were allowed to erect abominable temples and synagogues dedicated to perversion throughout the good land, and the good blood was poisoned forever. There is no saving him, said Faustus. There is no saving any of them, said John Merrick. People are neither rich or poor according to the quality of labor they produce, nor are the good or bad indiscernible when weighed against the ostrich feather of Maat. Those two are Rockefeller and Carnegie, and that good for nothing is Vanderbilt, said John Merrick, pointing to certain wretched souls bobbing up and down in the flames, and that one there is de Medici, and do you see that one? That good Catholic is Grand Burger Jacob Fugger of the Lily. He sold Swabia out to the Jews and imported the plague, the Black Death. Those dirty rats. Faustus blurted out passionately, and shaking his fist at them vehemently, he shouted out so that they could all hear him, God damn you bastards! You are all the sons of bitches, and you deserve what you get. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, cried out one of the pathetic lumps of turd in the burning belly of the beast. He wore a cone-shaped pointed white hat, a tight noose around his neck, which was obviously broken, and his face was bloated and blue. His tongue was sticking out of his mouth. The Lord is one. Who is that fool? Asked Faustus. That steaming piece of shit is Joseph Suss Oppenheimer. John Merrick replied. And Faustus tried to spit on him, for he knew what a dirty bastard that son of a bitch had been in life, but his spit fell short, landing on Dives Nemesis instead. Gaius Cassius Longinus, Marcus Junius Brutus, the 20 other traitorous Romans which assassinated Julius Caesar, and Marcus Tullius Cicero. General Friedrich Olbricht, Major General Henning von Treschow, and Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg who tried to assassinate Führer Adolf Hitler with a bomb are all in the belly of the beast. Assassins Dragutin Dmitrijevi and, a young Greek Orthodox militant, in the pay of the Russians, who killed King Alexander I of Serbia and Queen Draga Mason, on the night of 10/11 June 1903, were also in the shit. Gavrilo Princip of the anarchistic Black Hand, who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Duchess Sophie von Schotkova of Hohenberg, on June 28, 1914, was also in the steaming shit with his conspirators, Nedeljko Kabrinovi, Tripko Grabez, Veljko and Vaso Kubrilovi, Jeko Popovi, Danilo Ili, Misko Jovanovi, and Mohammad Murmad Basai. Dmitry Bagrov, Jewish assassin of Russian Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin. And that particularly putrid postulated puke is Yakov Mihailovich Yurovsky. Said John Merrick, the asshole who murdered the Romanov family and their friends. Authors note foremost among the 20 other traitorous Romans which assassinated Julius Caesar are, Marcus Junius Brutus, Gaius Cassius Longinus, and Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, each clambering over the others in trying to keep their heads out of the shit, but, intentionally, all without exception suffer worse for because of the others clambering over each other and, in so doing, pushing the heads of all compatriots deeper under the crap than if they just flow together in their deserved eternal resting place wherein, for them, there is never any rest. Also in the steaming cauldron of the beast's belly were, A.G. Kabanov, M.A. Medvedev, Kudrin, P.S. Medvedev, V.N. Netrubin, G.P. Nikulin, Y.M. Selms, S.P. Vaganov, and P.Z. Yermakov and Philip Isayevich Galashchikin. Then John Merrick touched his shoulder, to gain his full attention, and pointing to the beast, he said, Look. See how, in the one hand it is holding Isaac, and in the other hand Ishmael, and being swallowed in his mouth, ass up, is Abraham. Abraham is the father of the Jew and the Arab, said Faustus, and the Jews are God's chosen people. And they will be the death of the world, answered John Merrick, just as Jacob son of Isaac betrayed his mistress Hagar daughter of the king of Maghreb when he discovered that she was pregnant, and he abandoned her and his son Ishmael to die of thirst in the wilderness of Beersheba. Just as the Maggadi sons of Jacob the blowfly went into Egypt and made an outcast of Pharaoh in his own land, establishing the Epiphallic Hyksos high priesthood of Amun with the scourge. And thereby on Iabum's right side stood Saint Michael the taxiarch archangel, with two snowy feathered wings, holding a finger of his right hand to the lance which pierced the side of the serpent on the cross, blood and water flowing from the wound. In his left hand he held a scale. And he was fully armored with blue fire, with helmet, sword, and shield, and the shield was engraved with the words, Quis ut Deus. his lance was as lightning. Parousia, spake the angel, his voice the sound of trumpets sounding with unmistakable clarity. And Faustus was overcome by a feeling of peace. The great prince spoke again, saying, O Horus, this hour of the morning, of this third day is come, when thou shalt surely passeth out of heaven, together with the stars, the imperishable stars. John Merrick said to Faustus, Iabum, Kashar, and Zabalunu were three contemporary Bronze Age rulers within Shutu, when Shamuabu ruled Lower Shuru and Yelanizamu ruled Upper Shutu and Aminji ruled the agricultural and pastoral territories of Upper Retinu in South Syria, northwest Jordan, which was a tented kingdom called Kushu, later Moab, south of Shutu in what became Edom, between Moab and Midian. The Edomites, being descended from Esau, brother of Jacob son of Isaac, went into the hill country of Seir and killed Seir the Horite, who was a cave dweller, and took over the land calling it Edom. Edom, too, was a tent nation of tribal clan chiefs. John Merrick also said, Iabum's maternal grandfather was Nahor's son, Uz the elder, the brother of Buz. The daughter of Uz the elder married Dishan the Horite, their firstborn son was named Uz after her father, and the other son was called Aaron. The Horites were caste rulers who controlled the trade routes and water systems, at a time when the Sahara, Arabia, and Mesopotamia were wetter. They were devotees of Horus. They lived in the desolate wilderness, in the clefts of the valleys and in caves. Shaved-headed priests with shaved bodies offering sacrifices and worshipping fire. And Faustus saw three women thereby. Princess Uzit, Citados, of the land of Uz, his wife, the devil's accomplice, a diabolical fury, with her hair shorn short, weeping, she said to him, Dost thou still retain thy integrity? And answered herself, angrily saying, Curse God and die. To which Iabum's reply was, simply, should we accept only good from God and not evil? Dinah, daughter of Jacob, his concubine, spoke bitter words to the other woman, saying, Because Shechem has committed an outrage in Israel. To which Iabum answered, You talk as any shameless woman would talk. Iabum's young unmarried mistress, however, stood dumb and motionless, unable to say or do anything. She is like Cordelia, the good daughter of Lair. John Merrick said to Faustus, Listen, she speaks at last. Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth, said she to Faustus. And though he sympathized with her, what words could he speak? Should he speak? 3 girls were standing nearby, Iabum's daughters by Dinah, Jemimah the dove, the eldest and most beautiful, playing the lyre and singing as the angels sing, Kezia, the second-born, holding an incense pan with aromatic cinnamon smoking in it, and she praised all the acts of heaven, and Karen Hapuch, the youngest, her darkened eyes streaming green antimony over her white face, she was beating on a drum and speaking in the language of the cherubim. Nowhere were there any more beautiful to be found. 3 men, his friends, King Eliphaz of Taman, Edom, Bildad of Shuah, and Zophar, stood around him lamenting, Whither has thy glory gone, and offering praise that their secret sin is taken away. Eliphaz said, You are being punished for your sins. Bildad said, You are being tested to receive a greater reward. Zophar said, You suffer because of God's arbitrary mood swings. Elihu the Buzit, a wild beast that looks like a man, was there, too, imbued with the contemptuous spirit of Satan, mocking the baptizing teacher of righteousness by speaking hard words to Iabum, saying, Prepare the way for the Lord. John Merrick said to Faustus, He is called the Evil One, the son of darkness, the lover of the serpent, Zephaniah the northern one, and the hater of saints. And there was a great disembodied mourning sound filling the air, with the cries and the groans of the dying and the damned. It was a ferocious, rabid drooling 3-headed pit bull, and this lay down at Iabum's feet and began to lick the suppurating pus oozing from the leper sores on his legs, assuaging his agonies somewhat, and he smiled and pet the animal, stoking its fearsome heads. John Merrick then said, Faustus, Dinah daughter of Leah the wild cow and Jacob son of Abraham was violated by Shechem son of Hamor, a Canaanite, or Hivite prince. And a frog-headed woman clothed in stars approached them, a torch in one hand and a great golden key in the other. She is known to the Egyptians as Heket, and to the Greeks as Hecate, John Merrick said, and to the Romans as Trivia, the witch queen of ghosts, upon whose altar Iphigenia was sacrificed. And the vision began changing into an immense wall of flames, through which they now passed, and Faustus heard the frog-headed woman speak to him, and the sound of her voice was the sound of a myriad of barking frogs, saying, Dinah was conceived as a male in Leah's womb but miraculously changed into a female. And came riding up upon a white bull beside them in the fire, a woman whose flesh was crawling with snakes and scorpions and centipedes. She is Pasiphae, the mother of Asterion the Minotaur by the white bull, sister of Circe the sorceress, the aunts of Medea the sorceress, who killed and dismembered her brother and scattered the pieces on Circe's island, doing so out of her love for Jason, the Argonaut of the Golden Fleece, and she also conspired with the daughters of power-hungry Peleus to kill their father, and they cut him to pieces and threw them into a pot. Peleus and Neleus were twin sons of Poseidon's lust for their mother Tyro, daughter of King Salmoneus of Elis, and Alcide, daughter of King Aeneas of Arcadia, the founder of the cult of Athena et Alia. And Alcide bore Salmoneus a son, but she killed him, before giving birth to the twins. Citero the Iron One was their stepmother, but the twins killed her atop the altar to Hera for her having mistreated their mother, for she had tricked Tyro into killing her firstborn, telling her that the newborn would kill her father. And when Jason abandoned her, Medea avenged her husband's betrayal by murdering her own children by him. And Faustus said to John Merrick, his guide out of the depths of hell and through the fire, wouldst that I'd rather be shown good Rachel the ewe, sister of Leah the wild cow, the daughters of Laban son of Bethuel son of Nahor son of Terah, the wives of Jacob son of Isaac son of Abraham. The daughters of Abraham. And John Merrick replied, saying Rachel, like Rebekah, and Sarai before her, was unable to conceive, for all their husbands were impotent to them. So she grew jealous of her sister Leah, and gave Jacob her maidservant, bashful Bilhah daughter of Ahote and Hannah, to be a surrogate mother for her, and she gave birth to 2 sons. And Leah also gave her maidservant, Zilpah, who was younger than Bilhah, and she also gave birth to 2 sons in the competition between Jacob's wives to bear him sons. But Ahote is just another name for Laban, and Hannah, the mother of Bilhah and Zilpah, was his concubine. Then John Merrick said, Isaac son of Abraham and Sarai married Rebekah, the sister of Laban, and they were the children of Bethuel, the youngest son of Abraham's brother Nahor, and Milcah daughter of her father's brother Haran, who died in Ur-Kasdim of the Chaldees. Isaac sent his servant Eliezer the Damascene son of King Nimrod of Shinar son of Cush and great-grandson of Noah, who was a mighty hunter on the earth in the face of God, and built the twin towers of Babel, to purchase a wife for him. And Isaac's servant found Rebekah, who wore a veil when she wed him. Faustus then heard Rebekah's family saying from out of a swirling mass of color which came out of the fire and smoke, Our sister, may you come, you be thousands of myriads, and may your offspring inherit the gate of its foe. And then Faustus heard Isaac's family recite the same saying. And the sounds repeated over and over until they became a garbled noise that faded and echoed and, at last, silenced. And distinct shapes began to indiscriminately form and dissolve as the swirling colors transformed into the darkness of space, filled with far-off stars. John Merrick said to Faustus, as they aimlessly flew aloft over the earth, Lot was Milcah's brother, who went with Abram through the land of the Hittites to the land of Egypt, for Pharaoh was Sarai's brother even as her husband was her brother, and, verily, Egypt would welcome them. Princess Sarai of the Hittites was 10 years younger than her brother husband Abram, who was later called Abraham. Now, while Abraham was with Melchizedek, the high priest of the Salem cult, the 4 kings came and smote the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Hearing this, Faustus lost control of his heart and spoke in tongues, saying, The Prince of Peace, without mother, without father, without descent, having neither beginning of days, nor end of life. Indeed, John Merrick replied, Jesus Christ was called of God a high priest forever of the order of Melchizedek. And from out of nowhere came the demon Belial, father of Lucifer, a conjoined twin Charles Manson, lawless and worthless, sitting on a bloody pile of butchered bodies in a chariot of fire pulled by a fire-breathing winged serpent with 4 clawed feet, and he was singing and twanging on a makeshift harp made of a broken rib cage and gut strings made of intestine and Caligula, the most fucked up of the Caesars, was his charioteer. Manson was screaming, "May he never rise." Caligula was screaming, "I have the right to do anything to anyone." And darkness came with them, blocking out the celestial lamps, forcing John Merrick and Faustus to descend from the empyreal. And Cain and Judas and Nero were flying like horrible wingless cherubim around Belial's chariot. And bearded Cain, clothed in animal hides, was like any other wild man, with long, uncombed hair and wielding a heavy wooden club. And Judas, like a wolf clad in sheep's skin, with a rope around his neck and his bloody guts hanging out of a gaping wound in his stomach, called out, "I am the one." His long hair and beard were well combed, and legion following behind, flocked around him, screaming and hissing and cussing, calling out, "What's that to us, and you have betrayed innocent blood and you have sinned." And as Cain and Judas grabbed at their chariot of kaleidoscopic and sparkling light, striking it and shaking it, taunting Faustus with vile threats of pain beyond death, Nero flew up by them, wearing a blood-soaked purple toga embroidered with gold thread and crowned with a laurel wreath, making an appalling noise on a harp, weeping and singing woefully, "What an artist dies in me." His hair was curled and framed his face, and though he had sideburns, he was otherwise clean-shaven. Mistress Sporus, a young boy dressed in a sleeveless stula and wearing a veil, holding his bleeding testicles in his hands, his wrists bleeding from self-inflicted wounds, hovered in the air close by Nero, who had castrated him. Then came upon them of a sudden, the sovereign goddess Anhita, wearing a mantle bordered in purple and embroidered with gold and bearing the sacred plant Homa in her hand, standing in her chariot, pulled by 4 wild horses, wind, rain, cloud, and sleet. A boisterous north wind began to blow in their teeth, and the air around them grew cold, filled with lightning, cracking like a whip, which struck their chariot and rocked it. Faustus was terrified, and rightfully so. For below them was an empty chasm, and should he fall from the chariot because of what was going on around him, there would be no end to his descent. He closed his eyes in terror, his heart pounding like a drum in his ears, his body trembling and shivering in a cold sweat. "Oh please! Oh please! Oh please!" Faustus sobbed. "Lord save us!" John Merrick, though, just laughed him to scorn, saying, "Be of good cheer and trust to fortune, it is I who is with you, be not afraid." Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the demonic host which tormented them was gone, chased off by the goddess. The wind died down and the darkness of space was replaced by thick clouds, which enveloped them so that they had difficulty seeing each other. Then, emerging into daylight, Faustus looked and saw the green waters of the Mediterranean surging far beneath them. But any salvatory hopes he might have harbored as they first passed over the sea to fly above the land floundered when he heard a far-off rumbling sound that sounded like thunder. Though the sun was setting, he could yet still plainly see a great cloud of dust moving over the earth like a pillar of smoke, and as night chased the shadows away below them, he could see that the pillar of smoke metamorphed into a pillar of fire. Andon and Fanta and the Andonic aborigines moved northwards to avoid living with their inferior tree-dwelling relatives. When migration was blocked by the ice and, as the dispersing tribes became more increasingly hostile towards one another, they instinctively sought to escape the danger of mingling with the inferior simian tribes. In the forest man has always deteriorated, so they avoided the forest in contrast to the habits of their non-human relatives. The descendants of Andon and Fanta migrated far to the west and the east. The groups going west were less contaminated than those going east, who mingled freely with their retarded animal cousins, these unprogressive individuals drifting southward and mating with inferior tribes. Later on, increasing numbers of these mongrels returned north to mate with the Andonic peoples, deteriorating the superior stock and dragging the civilized worship of the breath giver back into bestiality, threatening civilization with extinction at the dawn of time. The arts of Enden and Fonta and culture of Onagar were vanishing, flint working was at its lowest ebb. Large numbers of inferior mongrel groups were arriving in Celtic lands, their bloodlines so mixed with the ape-like forest creatures that they were scarcely human. These crude people barely possessed sufficient intelligence to kindle fire. They were followed in Europe by a somewhat superior and prolific people, the Heidelberg race. Came in turn invention of flint and fire, then the will was given the people of the cave of the clan of the hand, the sorcerer and the boy who had learned the woman's secret. Oh, the story of menstruation and menopause, pregnancy and lactation, and of the moon all her secrets, too, were freely known and spiritually shared by the daughters of Eve, even unto the sad morning whence Cain slew Abel, and our most ancient homelands in the fertile black lands of the Indus River, Japheth, the Tigris-Euphrates River, Shem, and the Nile River, Cham, whose bastard son Mizraim was sired by his father, hence was in Cham accursed nigger. The Asiatics of Nod Abel had a twin sister named Kelamath or Azura, or Eclea. Cain had a twin sister named Lebuda or Lulawa. Seth married his sister Azura, daughter of Adam and Eve. And after Cain slew his brother Abel with a stone, in a fit of jealous anger over his beautiful sister Achlama's unrequited love and her reciprocated intimacy with their brother, Abel, Cain abducted and raped his ugly sister Awan, and fleeing together, the two of them became fugitives and wanderers, exiled from the cursed earth. In the land of Nod, east of Eden, Awan bore Cain an inbred son named Enoch, who built the first city. Enoch fathered 77 children by 2 wives, and Irad, who was a rebellious bad seed, was foremost among them. Enoch took his sister Noam to wife. Kainan ben Enos of Elda took his sister Mehullalah to wife and fathered. Irad the wild ass was the father of Mehujael the shepherd, the father of Methushael the suppliant, who lived for 969 years, the father of Lamech the destroyer, a rude ruffian, fearing neither God nor man, who took 2 wives gorgeously adorned, Ada and Zillah, whose jewelry jingled, both the daughters of Kainan the metalsmith, the son of Enos, the first mortal son of Seth, the son of Adam and Eve. Ada and Zillah degraded the dignity of womanhood, and draped themselves with external ornaments disguising their inner beauty. Ada bare 2 sons, Jabal, the father of tent-dwellers and slavery, and Jubal, the first to play music on the harp, and Zillah, who was barren, in her old age bare Tubal-Cain, an alchemist and metallurgist who wrought bronze and iron, and his sister, Naamah, a stunning girl, who by her tempting allure and feminine charm induced man to humiliate himself even more so before woman, and by the wantonness and vain mechanizations of her triumph fell more deeply into sin. The visible mark of Cain being the epicanthic fold and lower-based nose bridge of Asiatic Mongoloids. Of the race of Iron Age giants and the sons of god, Oedipa was one of the 7 of Kalu demigods of Sumer, which worshipped Enki before the deluge. Goliath and King Og of Bashan and the giants of Canaan, the Rephaim, the Emim, the Zomsamim, the Anakim, who were one people, and the Nephilim Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim and the Zuzim in Ham and the Emim in Shaveh Kiriathim. The Emim lived in Moab formerly, a great and numerous people as tall as the Anakim. Like the Anakim they are regarded as Rephaim, but the Moabites call them Emim. The land of the Ammonites was also regarded as the land of the Rephaim, for Rephaim formerly lived in it, but the Ammonites called them Zomsamim. The Rephaim, the Emim, the Zomsamim once lived in the land east of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. The Anakim were a tribe of the Rephaim that lived west of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Anak was the forefather of the Anakim, a mixed race of giants descended from the Nephilim. Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmah were the sons of Anak, which were driven out of the land of Hebron, south of Jerusalem, and slain by Caleb. The Nephilim, not to be confused with the fallen angels, were the offspring of the uncircumcised sons of God, descended from Seth, and the daughters of men, the unrighteous descendants of Cain, before the deluge, who inhabited Canaan at the time of the Israelite conquest. Chedorlaomer and his confederates smote the Rephate in Ashtaroth, where King Og of Bashan had his residence. The dead kings now rule the spirits of the dead in the netherworld. So too didst Abishai slew Ishbi-Benob, a Philistine giant, and David killed Goliath. The four kings of Mesopotamia and the battle of Shittim. John Merrick said, Lot was living in Sodom with his wife and their 2 daughters, but they were all saved from destruction by 2 angels, which took them out into the desert and left them safe. And God cast down lightning, fire and brimstone upon the city and burned it and its inhabitants, and laid waste to the country with like burning. Still, the family of Lot were safe, but his wife looked back upon Sodom and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Thereafter, Lot dwelt in a cave with his 2 daughters, but these grew lustful and got their father drunk on wine, and when he was drunk they each incestuously lay with him as his wife would and became pregnant by him. Thus, the older daughter conceived Moab, father of the Moabites, and the younger daughter conceived Ben-Ammi, father of the Ammonites. 3 harlots. John Merrick then pointed out the land of Shechem below them, saying, when Jacob had purchased land from him and pitched his tent, Shechem took Dinah daughter of Jacob and he lay with her and he so humbled her. Jacob demanded that the bride price to be paid would be that the men of the land be circumcised. And it was so. And when it had come to pass the Shechem and the other men of the land were circumcised, and Sor, 2 of the sons of Leah and Jacob, Simeon and Levi, took their swords and came upon the city at unawares, and killed all the men thereof. They slew Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went away. And the sons of Jacob plundered whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, and their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses. And Faustus saw Jacob chastise his sons, saying, You have brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. And Faustus heard them answer, Should he treat our sister as a harlot? Then John Merrick told Faustus the story of Tamar, an Israelite, calling her a half-caste Hyksos Egyptian harlot, and a vision was revealed to Faust of Tamar removing her widow's garments and taking up the veil, and prostituting herself at the temple in Timnah to Judah, her father-in-law, securing his signet ring, staff, and cord, in pawn for a pledge to return with a young goat. He saw how Judah would have burned her but could not do so as she was in lawful possession of the pawn he had pledged. Faustus saw how she gave birth to the twins, Zerah and Perez, how Zerah first put out his hand and the midwife bound a scarlet thread around his wrist, and how he drew it back so that his brother would become firstborn, but he was a breech birth. And this is the beginning of the Christ, the son of King David, son of Solomon, Faustus said to John Merrick as the vision began to change again. Rahab was a Canaanite prostitute who lived in Jericho, the oldest city in the Middle East and, originally, a cave city where they worshipped fire and the moon and practiced human sacrifice in cannibalistic orgies at the end of the Neolithic Age, and in the beginning of the Age of Copper. Rahab was a madam and ran a brothel wherein she harbored the 2 spies sent out by Joshua to inspect Jericho, which is what Lot did in Sodom. The second part of the vision, as they flew up through the night air together, circling the Holy Land between of promise below, John Merrick said to Faustus, Laban was a brother-in-law to Isaac and, both, a father-in-law and uncle to Jacob, the younger brother of hairy Esau the Red, whom Rebekah and Isaac tricked, stealing his birthright and his blessing, fleeing to the Aramean kingdom of Paddan Aram in Mesopotamia, near Haran, where Abram and his father Terah had settled after leaving Ur Kaddim of the Chaldees, while en route to Canaan. Later, pointing out a cave, John Merrick said, This is Machpelah, the cave of the double tombs. In the one cave lay the patriarchs, Adam, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, and in the other cave lay the matriarchs, Eve, Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah. Faustus replied, This is a most holy place. John Merrick just laughed. The chariot of kaleidoscopic and sparkling light descended and John Merrick landed it on the rocky earth beneath the mountain wherein the cave was. The moon is horned, Faustus remarked, and I see the planet Venus, the morning star. Does this bode ill for me? You must go on alone, now, Faustus said John Merrick, and he and the chariot both vanished. Enter of your own volition, and you will see what is yet in your heart, were his final words. So Faustus climbed up the mountain face and entered into the cave, alone, and after a long while of wandering its seemingly endless recesses, he came at last to the end of the passage. The stone is rolled away. Faustus entered the silent chamber and found 4 fiery bright gleaming beings standing amidst broken and scattered bones, as if long ago, desecrating grave robbers had pillaged the crypt. Faustus could see that there were 6 fractured skulls strewn about, and 6 broken mandibles. Faustus could also make out pottery shards as he picked his way through the gruesome debris. One was an angel named Metatron the youth, a prince of the divine presence holding a long, silvery trumpet, who sat enthroned upon the moon, waiting for the day of judgment in which he was to blast his horn. His was a monumental effigy, his flesh was like flame, and his veins like fire, his eyelashes were flashes of lightning, and his eyeballs flaming torches. At his feet reposed a brass lion, a symbol of his valor and nobility. The other was Adramelech, High Chancellor of the Order of the Fly, President of the High Council of Devils, and the Superintendent of the King of Demons' wardrobe. He had a human body, the head of a mule, and a kaleidoscopic tail like a fiery peacock. The eyes of its tail were fiery orbs like stars. At his feet rested a graven idol of gold in the shape of a horned cow. Authors note while the pagan Sepharites, one of the 10 lost tribes, chanted hymns, divinations, and enchantments, they sacrificed their children to him by burning them on pyres or placing them in heated bronze ovens shaped like brazen cows, called Moloch, which would moan out its mouth as they were cooked inside, hands reaching out of it like flaming tongues licking the sides of its mouth. Adramelech, the king of fire, is one of the 2 throned demons along with Asmodeus. He is the enemy of God, greater in ambition, guile, and mischief than Satan. A fiend more crust, a deeper hypocrite. Both beings wore cold slabs of carved stone on their chests, these being the tablets of the covenant. "Who are you?" said Faustus, his voice nothing more than a quiet whisper of a breath. Metatron said, "I have been young and now I am old." Adramelech said nothing to him, merely pointing out a small opening in the cavern wall close to the floor. Metatron said, "You can escape from the wilderness of this world into the promised land of heaven," and then he, too, pointed the way to Faustus. Faustus instinctively knew, without a doubt, that he must follow this path which had been chosen for him, or else, and so he forthwith resigned himself to it. Thus, he boldly strode between the 2 grandiose beings, although he seemingly began to feel as if he were shrinking in their presence, or was it that they, in their magnificence, were growing, becoming more and more luminous. His head lolled lower and lower until he was on the ground crawling, then prostrate on his belly, slithering like a snake. Thus he entered into the opening and disappeared down the tunnel. The brilliance behind him diminished, leaving him cloaked in blackness once again. He snaked his way through the tight tunnel, like a baby wanting to free itself of the womb, until, at last, he was reborn into a wider section of the tunnel and groping his way on his hands and knees, until, at last, he could stand on his feet and stumble through the darkness, until, of a sudden, he sensed a growing cacophony of flickering light, and heard the voice of man. The man's voice was garbled and muffled at first. Faustus strained his ears liste3ning, and approached what was obviously the end of the passage, a bright hole that gaped open before him. He saw them then, 3 figures, shadows really, moving on the craggy, jagged walls around him, exposed from a flickering light at what appeared to be the end of the tunnel. Cautiously, he inched himself forward, peeping out. The man's voice was louder now, the words more clearly pronounced and understandable. "Cry out loud," mocked the man's voice, "for he is a god, and either he is lost in thought, or he has wandered away, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened." Faustus, feeling it was safe, revealed himself. The libertines here was a slovenly man with a protruding stomach, wearing a powdered wig and plainly dressed in dark clothing with a stained white shirt that was graying with age. He was being fawned over by 2 beautiful, all two innocent teenage girls with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing ragged blue dresses and dirty white blouses and red Phrygian liberty caps with a tricolored cockade on them. These three were standing together at the foot of a smaragdose, emerald, statue of Melkart wielding a massive club and draped in a lion skin. "Welcome," the man said, his mouth and chin were stained purple from the wine he had indulged in. "I am Citoyen de Sada, and these fine wenches are Eponine and Azelma the spoiler, her sister. We have been sent by the god of fatal laughter to welcome you to this place." It was obvious to Faustus that Eponine was the elder. She held a flaming torch in her hand. "It took you fucking long enough to get here, asshole," sniped the younger girl. What, who?" stuttered Faustus. "Do you mean to tell me that you're waiting for me?" De Sada said, "But why else would we be lingering about this dismal place, monsieur?" "I don't understand." Faustus responded. "Who sent you? Would you believe me if I told you that a vision of angels sent by God," chuckled de Sada, "directed me here with instructions to await your arrival and conduct you with due haste to a great feast?" Azelma cut him off, hissing at Faustus, saying, "What's the matter, asshole? Are you afraid?" "No, Faustus began to speak, but the young girl cut him off. "Well, you better be afraid, fucker," she said menacingly. "If I was you, I'd be afraid. I'd be very afraid." "Azelma," laughed de Sada, "be kind to our guest. Not everyone is against you, though people mostly for themselves. He wants something from me." Azelma fussed. "Look at the dirty old pig, he can't take his eyes off of me." "I don't," mumbled Faustus. "But what do you think this man you just met wants from you?" asked de Sada. Eponine snickered and blurted out, "What do you think he wants, master?" "He wants what every man wants from me, my hot little ass," Azelma spat in a fury. "I don't want her," retorted Faustus, but he was just ignored by the others, who continued to taunt him, talking about him as if he wasn't even there. "Don't be such a hussy," Eponine said, sternly. "If this pig wants anybody's hot little ass, it's my hot little ass." Girls, don't bicker," de Sada responded. "If this piggy wants to play bo peep with you, I'm sure you are both ably sufficiently to satisfy his carnal desires." De Sada filled his hands full of both girls' bums and squeezed them. The two lusty girls embraced him, plying him with caresses and kisses. "Come along then, fellow, and be delighted." "I don't want." Faustus mumbled again. "But, monsieur," said de Sada, "everybody wants something. Come along. I've seen enough of this dreary place." Faustus followed after the trio mutely, as a sheep following its shepherd. Where is this place?" Faustus said after a long while, following his guides like an obedient dog, in contemplative silence. "Nowhere, really," answered de Sada. "Well," said Faustus, "it has to be somewhere, after all. I'm here, aren't I? And so are you. Here in this place you are who you think you are, but, regardless of how you perceive and present yourself," said Eponine. Azelma butted in, finishing her older sister's sentence, saying, "The others see you for who you really are." "It's true," said de Sada, putting an arm around Faustus. "There's no lying or denying it, but this place is teeming with unequivocal liars, perdurious fabulists, and prevaricatus tricksters, but it's so much simpler just to take things at face value." Eponine spoke up, saying, "In short, monsieur, what you see is what you get." "You see people not as they really are," chimed in Azelma, "but as you really want to see them. So if you don't like what you are seeing," said de Sada, "maybe you should just look long and hard at yourself. And don't be a goddamn hypocritical and judgmental prude, you old bastard," laughed Eponine, turning and walking off down a dark tunnel hitherto hidden in the recesses but now alighted by the burning brand. Come, monsieur," said de Sada, with a half-laugh, but it is quite rude to keep a lady waiting. If we are to get where we are going, we really should be going. Thus the four of them disappeared into the shaft, the jagged walls of which were alive with dancing shadows cast by the flickering flame of Epiphanes' flambeau. Epiphanes replied, "Torches just don't grow on trees down here." "What do you mean?" replied Faustus, "Of course they do, it's wood, isn't it? And just where do you think it came from?" Epiphanes snapped, "Have you seen any trees growing down here, or roots, even?" "Well," said Faustus, "where did you get it then?" "I suppose Mr. Desauta's angel gave to you." "No, shithead," said Azelma smartly. "We got it from one of the devils which come amongst us occasionally trading things of necessity for sexual favors." But she was lying to him. "We were sent by the wizard god of fatal laughter," quipped Azelma. "Legion and Queen Lilith of Zemargad voila." Azelma tittered, as they emerged into a large cavern. "The anarchist." "Legion. Legion," said Epiphanes, almost simultaneously with her sister, adding, "many different bodies sharing one common mind." It was a large, seemingly endlessly large, cavern full of stalagmites and stalactites and grottos, bubbling pools of stinking, steaming, and smoking lava, small, sputtering fires of blue-green flame illuminating the place. Faustus could see that stalagmites and speleothemic columns were covered in places with red, orange, yellow, and bright green moss and lichens, which hung from stalactites. In some places, where it had dried out, it was more grayish-green and brown. There were sporophytes, embryophytes, and gametophytes in abundance around pools of stagnant, stinking liquid slightly resembling oily black water, here and there, coated in brightly colored splotches of violet and red swirling together or mingling to create colorful reflective patches on the surface of the ponds. Creeping, crawling, slithering, biting, stinging insects and other vermin were everywhere to be seen. Some were even crawling upon Faustus and the others. Of course, these they brushed off. The small group ventured forth into the eerily lit chamber, listening in silence to the burbling, bubbling, burping sounds of the fiery lava pits around them. Then a noise was becoming more and more distinguishable. The noise grew louder and the light brighter, it became hot and, at last, quasi-flames spontaneous erupted around him, but he was neither burned nor consumed. Then, after a short while following them, an awful sound became more and more audible in the darkness, the sound of moaning and groaning, of wet flesh slapping against wet flesh, cursing and praises. "What you are about to see will probably shock you," said Desata. "Most people never make it past this place, believing that they have come to hell, and this is what hell is. But they are ignorant, uncivilized brutes without imagination of fortitude, savage and reprehensible in life and worse in the cessation of their mortal existence, but there is so much more to being and not being, to life and death, or heaven and hell." Of a sudden they came to stand at a ledge looking down into the great chasm, wherein were countless bodies entwined together orgiastically. There were hairy apes and ape-men, Vuormai and Nopcat, troglodytes and beast-men, shape-shifting therianthropes, donkey-eared satyrs and horned fawns, scaly reptilian-like humanoids, and short, gray-green aliens with big black eyes, and tall, beautiful blue-skinned aliens with long white hair, Satanale and the Grigori, fallen angels, their size being greater than that of giants who married women and befouled the earth with their deeds, having no belly buttons or nipples and filthy feathery wings crawling with lice and other vermin, and slimy or scaly demonics with tattered leathery bat-like wings, some flying, fluttering above and descending back into the disgusting fucking mob, most of whom had hairy armpits and pubic hair, besides having hair on their limbs. There were hideous flying cherubim, as well. Long-haired men, many bearded, although there were also many baby-faced youths, and women in abundance, including Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and even Neanderthals, young and old, ugly and beautiful, people of every race and color, every size and shape, retards and freaks of nature, too, as well as badly malformed people, and sick, diseased people, and lunatics, ugly deformed cambions, and people with the heads of frogs, snakes, lions, goats, crocodiles, birds, fish, and other animal forms. Some having the tails, the limbs and bodies of many were covered in open red syphilitic sores and green pus-filled wounds. Some of the females were menstruating, while others were pregnant and lactating. The ground was wet and slippery with their waste, and all the participants in the orgy were shit-covered. A grotesque howling statue of bird-footed, owl-winged Lilith the night hag, bleeding from her womb, standing with two venomous asps in her hands, carved of black stone and standing within the midst of the prurient throng of orgiastic scurrilets, called Legion. She had once been Adam's first wife, created at the same time as him, but not out of the same red dust. Instead, she had been fashioned out of filth and sediment. Lilith abandoned Adam, refusing to be subservient to him, and made a cuckold of him, coupling with the archangel Samael, the wrath of God. She was standing upon a massive zebra bird, half man, half bird, having an eagle's head. A pure white-winged unicorn was hanging crucified in their midst on the left side of Lilith. It whined pitifully, as it was not yet dead. It had the head of a horse with a single, spiral horn from its forehead, the beard of a goat, the tail of a lion and cloven hooves. A winged fire-breathing plumed serpent with a vulture's head, wearing a vulture-headed uraeus crown, and 4 dragon-clawed limbs, was hanging crucified on her right side. Both were crying in pain, and there are no words which can describe their humiliation. Faustus was led through the distorted, squirming plebeian commonality, Epiphanes taking him by one hand and Azelma the other, both following Desatta as he picked his way through the churning mass of lubricious debauches. Faustus remarked, "All these unpenitent sinful souls disgust me." "They aren't disgusted by you, Faustus," Desatta said, "and you're more than welcome to join them. I'm sure they'd not mind one bit." Egad. Faustus tore his transfixed gaze away from the obscene mass of dirty, sweaty, grunting, groaning bodies surrounding him as far as he could see, and he looked right into Desatta's eyes. "Do you think that I am a fool, man? I assure you that I am not insane, nor any kind of pervert." "It's all a matter of opinion, Faustus," said Desatta. "These souls justly mix together in this orgiastic melting pot of—" Faustus, unable to restrain his growing anger, and jealousy which he mentally blocked and denied, blurted out, "Of their perdition, their goddamned eternal punishment and damnation." Desatta continued on, uninterrupted by Faustus' rude outburst, saying, "Their collective unconsciousness, since they are all like-minded. No one is forcing anyone to be here, or to stay, and they're all free to quit the group if they please. No one will stop them, though they might be remembered briefly and missed. But I assure you, monsieur, that they will be quickly forgotten as new experiences reveal themselves to the inmates of this asylum." "Freedom, I'm sure that it's all their pleasure, monsieur," said Desatta. "What you see as impossible and unnatural comes easy to these. What you see as evil, they see as a common good," said Desatta. "Who's to say for certain whether they're right or wrong, or you are?" "Freedom means being able to say and do what you want," said Azelma. "People want freedom," said Azelma. "Freedom to think, to move, to say what they like." "People do not really want freedom," answered Faustus, "because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility." "You are a slave if you do not have freedom," said Faustus. "Even a slave has free will to power," said Azelma. "Freedom is a social convention," Epiphanes said. "We need only one thing from our fellows, freedom. The freedom to live for oneself, neither sacrificing oneself for others, nor sacrificing others to oneself." "But this is not freedom," responded Faustus. "This is an anarchistic mob in which all the participants are pursuing their own selfish ends." "What a man can be," said Desatta, "he must be." As the small group circumvented the swelling throb of ecstatic bodies, making their way through the tangled mess of limbs, hands caressing them in their passing, voices urged them to shed their garments and join them, and there was a disgustingly pungent odor, a mephitic, undulating putrescence caused by the stench of their waste, leaving a bad taste in his mouth, and, all the while, the importunate sonorousness dirge, the moaning and groaning and wailing of the convulsing orgiastics. Everywhere resounded amidst the mushy wet sounds of flesh slapping against flesh, and a re-echoing chorus of yes and no and oh God. Apollyon. Then Faustus saw Apollyon the Destroyer, an utterly dismal, dreadful serpent man with unusual physical strength, having pearlaceous, iridescent skin, and nacreous opalescent insectoid wings. Apollyon radiated an unclean osmotic black light, and was wearing an Esidaridian culus helmet, a linen, lenothorax, breastplate, and bronze greaves on his shins. The angel was surrounded by a plague of locusts which swarmed around him, flying and crawling over him, resembling horses with crowned human faces, having long unkempt, dreaded women's hair, lion's teeth, membranous insect wings, iron breastplates, and tails with scorpion stingers. The sound of their wings was the sound of chariots, of many horses running into battle. Apollyon was very beautiful, attractive, and Faustus had a hard time not being deceived by his appearance. "Don't look into its eyes," whispered Azelma, "and it won't notice you. Just keep moving," whispered Eponine. But it was difficult for him to look away, and like Lot's wife, his soul began to turn to salt as he watched Apollyon selecting the dead and dying from amidst the tangled bodies. "What you think you are seeing is invisible," said Desatta to Faustus, shaking him by the shoulders. "If your eye could see them for what they were, you could not endure it. They surround us on all sides, they are more numerous than us mortals." "But I can see its footsteps burning on the rock," saith Faustus. Faustus fell down in a heap, and as he was getting back up he looked, anyways, and he watched in utter disbelief as young, beautiful sociopathic succubi and incubi, having both avian and reptilian features, such as furry, leathery wings, talons, serpentine tails and long forked tongues manifested. They were horned and had cloven feet, their foul genitals were teeming with fat, white lice and smaller reddish-orange crabs, they were vain, malevolent, and predatory, and though all suffered from syphilis or gonorrhea, the creeps wantonly copulated with each other, laughing and grunting and moaning their pleasure, all saying, "I am a sinner." These could be seen everywhere tormenting the orgiastics, and Faustus watched through wide, unblinking, staring eyes as their ecstasy transformed into suffering. What he had hitherto perceived as a most reprehensible sin, Faustus now observed to be an agony. He couldn't believe his eyes. 4 feminine demonesses and desecrating legions, sacred sexual power came 4 feminine demons, their vulva seeping with urine and other fluids, queens of demons and mothers of plagues, naked and orgasmic, emerging from nowhere and coming amongst the multicellular slug-like languishing mass that was the living soul of legion. First and foremost was Agrat Batmalat, the mistress of sorceresses, whose mother was an illusion, the fear in the darkness hiding within shadows, an attractive hellion with red, glowing eyes and 2 horns growing out the sides of her skull, her wild red hair a dreadful, squirming mass of writhing snakes, her fingernails and toenails were painted orange, she wore a grey, tattered and torn garter belt with worn leg garters with rusty snaps holding up ragged, nethosieri, her stockinged feet, disappearing into scaly opera stilettos. She had 2 large black bat-like wings, but chose to fly through the air in a chariot pulled by an ox, with 18 myriads of messengers of destruction following in her train, and these were speaking together in a myriad of voices, some loud roaring and others soft whispering, in every language of mankind, including antiquated tongues and dead ones, an awful noise, a saddening cacophony of retribution, lex talionis, and an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. She swooped down close by Faustus and screamed out, "Die, you piece of shit!" He loudly exclaimed, "Oh my God!" and cowered in fear of dying, realizing that it was too late to turn and run. But the demoness was more interested in one of the dying spirits within the orgiastic mob, and, laughing insanely, she bounded out of her chariot and fell upon the wretch, brutally tearing at its guts and strangling the poor soul with its own intestines. Putting her face in close to her dying prey, looking into its eyes, Still laughing manically, she sucked out the dying embers of its life energy through her eyes, before blasting it with a diabolical dark energy. She licked her blood-dripping talons, smearing blood all over her bosom, already looking around for another victim. Looking right at Faustus, or he was sure she was, saying, "I'm looking for someone that can play rough with me." But she was talking to the corpse, saying, "Come now, show a girl how to have a good time." She had once mated with David and, of this union, produced a Cambian son, Asmodeus, king of demons. Eschitzanunum, princess of whoredom, a thin, graceful pale golden glowing crone with long, black hair, and 2 horns growing out of her skull and growing down on either side of her head into points, slightly touching her face. She was wearing a 6-horned crown, her body was a fluid, fiery electromagnetic plasma. Her eyes were glowing red coals. She wore demonic black leather corset which cupped her large breasts, her swollen nipples exposed. She also wore spiky black leather gloves with shiny spikes. She was a bold, bat-winged lesbian warrior, although immature and childish, wanton, greedy, full of lust. She hungered an unrelenting nymphomaniac sexual appetite. She feasted on the souls of the damned, a seductive devil drawing the unwary into the sins of the flesh and sucking on menstrual blood. The most viscous of the 4, her heart was a raging storm. She raped and killed at her leisure and delighted in consuming their dying spirits, as she damn well pleased. Sadistically enjoying their screams, sobs, and dying breaths, laughing diabolically as her victims bled, agonizing in pain, she took pleasure in their suffering and inflicting increasing pains upon them just to appease her torrid appetite. Mahalath, daughter of Malat, daughter of Kazdeel the Egyptian sorcerer, came dancing and stroking a harp, reeking of incense and burning spices, singing, "For my soul is full of trouble and who eat up my people as they eat bread." Nama, demoness of sacred prostitution, pleasant and pleasing goddess of divination, a crouching lycanthrope with hairy limbs, pushing her snout into the rocky ground and making strange sounds as if she were being repeatedly sodomized by an unholy spirit, the shadow of death to the other world. Her flesh was a living fauna, leafed veins and a blooming/dying kaleidoscope of ever-changing, churning colors. Bogeymen then appeared, the orci, which were neither demon nor ogre, being something between corpses and evil spirits, bred of the subterranean heat and slime. They were brutish, aggressive, repulsive, malevolent, corrupt humanoid creatures with hearts of granite, aggressive scavengers and opportunistic cannibals who love eating mortal flesh, green, gray, black, or brown, and sometimes dark red like dried blood, of various sizes with bow legs and long arms, ugly and filthy, with long fangs and grotesque facial features, a mixture of ape-like and pig-like, possessing low cunning and only the rudiments of a crude culture. They are a subject race, violent by nature and ferocious if compelled, but tending towards chaotic behavior. They were cowards. And with them came a horde of goblins, evil, grotesquely deformed, cunning, dwarf-like ephemeral demons with hooked noses and, stout or slim, all had warty, slimy green skin. Their brows were fully covered with thick hair, their mouths filled with yellow, crooked, and rotten teeth. They had coarse and raspy, slightly high-pitched voices, and spoke mortal tongues as well as their own undecipherable language. Both species were rag riders, rags being fearsome albino, cave-dwelling descendants of the extinct dire wolves. And these monstrosities collected up the devastated and ravaged flesh of the dying and the dead souls, flying with or carrying these to the ogres manifesting in the distance, which Faustus watched through disbelieving eyes as these monsters tore the corpses limb from limb, rending torsos, crushing heads in powerful, taloned hands, throwing the fleshy pieces into great iron cauldrons glowing white-hot and red-hot over black, smoky coal fires. The ogres were large and hideous humanoid creatures, bigger than a man but smaller than a troll, hulking, unintelligent and clumsy brutes, having large, ugly, disproportionate features. They were solidly built monsters with huge rounded heads, large stomachs, and abundant and hirsute hair and beard. They had big mouths filled with prominent teeth, yellow, rotten, and wormy. Their awful breath reeked of decaying meat and their bodies smelled, terribly, horrific. They were gluttonous and cannibalistic, having a fondness for the flesh of children. The ogres filled the cauldrons with the torn, rent pieces of the mortal flesh chosen by the four demonesses, as well as with the moss, fungi, and mold growing intermittently throughout the cavern, and shit. The foul liquid within them was drawn from steamy wells in the cavern floor, either bubbling up from beneath the surface or stagnant ponds collecting from the drippings falling from stalactites. The mangled wings of victims were thrown into burning pyres where they were consumed in black, stinking smoke. The putrid goop that was boiling in the cauldrons was slimy and greenish and resembled vomit. A thick yellow mist crawled out of the cauldrons, seeping over the edges and draining down into the glowing coals, where it steamed. Orcus, prince of the undead, was a wild, black, hairy, bearded prehistoric ogre with the head and legs of a goat, ram-like horns, having a single cycloptic eye in the middle of his forehead, a bloated stomach, bat-like wings, and a long tail. He wears a simple, leather modius, or flat-top cylindrical headdress, ornamented with strange symbols and an uraeus, and is covered in a hairy animal hide. Orcus was banging on a large copper kettle drum with a meaty, bloody humerus. A chthonic domain, he was the living embodiment of abysmal sickness, an infectious asymptomatic carrier of migraines, fever, shivering, joint pain, vomiting, anemia, jaundice, blood in the urine, retinopathy, and convulsions, whose only purpose was inflicting misery and evil. Demogorgon, the supreme primal godfather of Pan, a dark, wailing spirit towering 18 feet high, his body at once sinuous like that of a snake yet powerful like a great ape. Two baleful baboon heads, one is called Animul and the other Hatradia, which try to dominate, and even kill, each other, constantly cursing at and spitting on each other, leer from atop his lumbering shoulders, from which writhe two long tentacles, instead of arms. His lower torso is saurian, like a reptile with an immense forked tail. Demogorgon's hypnotic gaze drove the bogeymen insane. His whip-like tail lashing them into frenzies. His leprous tentacles caused flesh to rot if touched. The hatred between Orcus and Demogorgon is legendary. Orcus may have been the beating heart of Legion, but it was Demogorgon which was the tongue. Malconthit was Demogorgon's adulterous concubine, and she fanned the flames of his jealousy by flirting with Orcus, and other demons. The succubus queen Malconthit, an incredibly alluring human-like figure with a sardonic smile on her ruby-red lips, her eyes smolder with dangerous red sensuality. Large, leathery bat wings stretch from her back, the joints of which are laced with razor-like claws, curved horns jut from her brow and hold back her long, dark hair, and a long sinuous prehensile tail tipped with a curved spike-like stinger. The vampiric succubus queen of the sluts was wearing a revealing gown of diaphanous silk and razor-studded leather straps around her wrists, and toyed with a glittering, sparkling scourge made of fine adamantine spiked chains, taking great pleasure in tormenting the orgiastics. 13 notorious and intolerant Liliths served their lascivious mistress, Malconthit, each one having a soul-draining locket and a bright shining halo, all shining in different hues, midnight, violet, crimson, snow, jade, ash, cherry, emerald, rose, hyacinth, tawny, ivory, and azure. Their devotion was total and unwavering. These seductive, murderous minions were wingless, but nonetheless they floated and flew of their own volition, whipping and kissing the orgiastics, radiating chaos and agony throughout the churning mass of mortal bodies, and driving the thralls. The mortal thralls of Malconthit were hedonistic seducers, profane women which had totally given their lives over to the fulfillment of pleasure and pain. They were present in the midst of the mob, Legion, subverting the morals of the innocent amongst them. These thralls, alone of all the orgiastics, were aware of the demons and their servants, and they gave themselves willingly into thraldom. They slogged bowls carved of stone or fashioned of clay back and forth from the cauldrons to the hungering, prurient souls of the salacious spirits, of Legion. The bowls were either greedily grabbed out of their hands and guzzled by the thirsting plebs, which spilled more than they consumed, or placed them on the ground where the wretched horde drank from them like common animals, grunting and slurping. The larger pieces of meat, the joints of bones and the broken skulls, were thrown reckless into the mass of bodies, to be fought over and slashed or shared by the starving drudges. All this that Faustus beheld occurred between his raising himself from up off the ground to standing. He stood statuesque, awed, breathless. His eyes were wide open, pupils big like black saucers covering all of the iris, blankly staring 1,000 yards away into the darkness, seeing things that he really shouldn't have seen to begin with, but too curious and too fascinated by the macabre, paradoxical anomaly to look away. As he watched the demented, absurd pageant unfold before him, de Sada grabbed him by his shoulders, shaking him, slapping him across the face, time and time again, calling out his name, but Faustus' gaze was transfixed, focused upon the abounding horrors around him. As Elma kicked him in the ass over and over again, but nothing could break the man's hold on the unreal, or shake him free of its unnatural grip on him. He was slowly becoming as if one possessed, and beyond redemption. If they couldn't revive him, they would have to abandon him and flee to save their own skins. For the more reality Faustus attached to the intangible hallucination that he was enthralled and bedeviled by, the less real he became, and the more he faded from the phenomenon of the real world, and the more he manifested in the phantasmagoric demon realm, and the more the nightmare absorbed them with him. "Leave him," spat out Epiphanes, disgusted with Faustus for having a weak and submissive mind. "This imbecile will be the death of us all." Faustus could feel de Sada shake him, but it was in slow motion, and he could hear him yell at him, but it sounded all murmured and far away. He could hear Epiphanes cuss him, but every word was long drawn out, stretched and indistinguishable. It was in this trance that the lesser demons incarnated to Faustus, almost impossible to detect. They were unseen by the others at first, but quickly materializing, they quick became sentient of each other. The lesser demons then manifested the lesser demons, the devas, noxious creatures devoid of goodness of heart and mind, promoting chaos and disorder amongst legions, commonality as evil thoughts freezing the mind and, like an infectious communicable disease, spreading unnatural lusts, discontented oppressors, dominant, destructive, poisoners of righteous thoughts, full of perversion and strife, apostates uttering falsehoods, idolaters driven by greed and avarice, slothful and wrathful and blaspheming, deceitful, disgraceful whores, a pollution and a contamination, scornful and envious slanderers. Creatures of irreconcilable shadow, inside out and backwards, being invisible to the human eye except as obscure adumbrations of their penumbras, containing one evil, black flaming snake eye, twinkling, unsleeping eternal orbs of light shining from its own intrinsic luminosity. The devas soared silently, effortlessly, through the air, covering great distances quickly, penetrating and passing through everything, even each other. The genies are abusive creatures with free will made from smokeless and scorching fire, which were expelled from paradise for not bowing low to Adam. They are invisible and capable of traveling large distances at the speed of thought. The genies, humans, and angels make up the three known sapient creations of God, having free will to power like humans and unlike angels, who are slaves to God's will. The large, blue-bodied mrid are most powerful and most attractive, but arrogant and proud. Having little empathy for mortals, they have the ability to form as gas, liquid, or solid. The infernal Ifrit are enormous winged pyromaniacs formed from the blood of murdered victims, noted for their strength and cunning, wicked and ruthless beings which kill, torment, and rape mortals, ignorant, untruthful, oppressive, and treacherous. They can take different animal forms, resembling snakes, vultures, scorpions, dragons, dogs, asses, or other creeping animals. The Shane are exceptionally ugly things capable of taking human form, though their feet always remain as hooves. They appear to be carved from stone, with glossy skin and glittering eyes, and when they move it sounds like stone scraping on stone. They can burrow through stone, gliding through it as if was air, and shape stone and metal to their design psychokinetically, as with telekinesis. They are dirty, boastful, egotistical, and prone to sulking. They eat excrement and are diseased, existing on the borderline between light and darkness. They are fiery whisperers of hubris, and the enemy of mortal and genies alike, plotting the downfall and destruction of both. The ghoul are shape-shifting cannibalistic and vampiric creatures that feast on the flesh and blood of mortals, especially children stolen from the grave. They are ravenous anthropophagus, promiscuous and stupid, dangerous cowards. They are described as gaunt, lanky-armed, zombie-like humanoids with the legs of a donkey and the horns of a goat, but can assume animal shapes, especially hyenas. Their arms and legs end in razor-sharp talons, they have bulging eyes, and large mouths filled with rows of needle-like teeth, and their bite is diseased and pestilential. The Seirem existed as peripheral nightmares, the living embodiments of ever-hungering darkness, heartless primeval psyches abiding without restraint but in pure indulgent consumption, stirring fear within unknowing souls, feasting upon the emotion, and draining sentience. They were a bastardization of God's creative process created by the fallen angels after the Lucifer rebellion as unfinished, malformed abominations, a formidable swarm of imperceptible, flickering half-living shadows, less than vapor. No longer satisfied to ingurgitate the essence of life, the energy of a soul's psyche, some Seirem took on dusky brown or gray reptilian skin, and developed into the forms of hairy, bestial chimeras with matted fur, sharp claws and, their hearts beating and lungs breathing, circulating curdled poison for blood, they sated their desires for warm blood and raw flesh by feasting on victims from the unwitting orgiastics. These disgusting things, though, found light abhorrent and coward, lurking in the dark places where the spectral lights from the fire pits couldn't reach, luring victims telepathically. The Shadim are the malevolent parasitic firstborn offspring of death, disembodied souls which manifest as translucent apparitions resembling large jellyfish and anchor themselves to dead and dying bodies, or to unoccupied ones, as in the case of zoetic psyches in states of astral projection, thusly devouring legions orgiastic members, causing these to be brought before the King of Terrors. In their celestial state all Shadim appear as shimmering black clouds with flailing limbs, fluttering bat wings, pulsing to the beat of infernal madness, wide-staring black eyes, and, unlike jellyfish, other mostly unidentifiable organs. They have an undying hatred for living beings. Lesser drone Shadim are dominated by puppet masters, which are more intelligent, more powerful, and more malicious, these having the power to open astral gateways into the unlimited potential of the collective unconsciousness and its psychic emotions, as well as into other altered states of consciousness, cosmic realms of supernatural dreams, and multifarious parapsychological extrasensory perceptions, including corporeal quantum forces, electromagnetic energy fields and gravity, even time and space. Faustus is saved by Azelma's quick thinking "I told you not to look," snapped Asada, slapping Faustus across the face again, even though he knew he had his full attention now, but it was too late, they'd been noticed. "Quickly," said Azelma, removing her dirty blouse and revealing perfectly ripe breasts to Faustus, 2 cherry-taupe mounds of pure white cream. "Take me now, you fool." Epiphanes, still holding her blazing torch, and Asada were likewise exchanging kisses, caresses. Faustus, though, was prudish and resisted his natural urges and inclinations to inveigle the alluring waif giving herself to him. "Don't fight it," commanded Azelma. "Try and close your mind, you old boob," said Epiphanes, "what you can't see won't hurt you. They'll lose interest in us as you forget them, succumbing to your lust," uttered Asada betwixt hot, wet kisses. Still, Faustus was unable to grasp the seriousness of the situation, the predicament he had put them all in wanting to look at what he shouldn't have seen in the first place, and being proud and uprighteous, he resisted the young hussy's sexual advances. So the bogey men came near unto him, and the others, sensing him if not seeing him outright. Faustus tried to close his eyes and wish them away, wishing he was any place else but there, now, wishing he'd never been born, yet all the wishing in the world couldn't save him now, Here. Smiling ghoulishly, the bogeymen closed in on Faustus from all sides as he began losing cohesion in his world and taking solid shape in theirs. Azelma could feel Faustus' physical body deteriorate in her arms. She got down on her knees and crawled under his robe, and began fellating him. He was helpless, either her victim or theirs, and as he capitulated to the kisses of the young tatterdemalian's amorous mouth, the demonic slowly dissipated, vaporizing into flickering dreamlike light and losing shape, color, dimension, and awareness. "They're gone," breathed Faustus, at last, for he'd been holding his breath. "You can stop now." But Azelma had no intentions of stopping anything, and continued gratifying herself on Faustus. He tried to disgorge her from himself, but she was hidden safely within his robe, and freely pursued her pleasure. Then, her misadventure coming to its natural conclusion, she swallowed, emerging from beneath his garment, whipping her mouth with the back of her hand, smiling and laughing lustily. "When all is said and done," she said to Faustus, "you're as good as any man I've had." "What a trashy whore," laughed Epiphanes. "Don't call her that," Faustus remarked, feigning chivalry. "I was talking about you," laughed Epiphanes even heartier. "Slut." "Come," said Desatta, to which both girls heartily laughed, relieved that their certain doom had been so artfully circumvented. "We have to leave this place, he might succumb to his curiosity again." Thus the four pilgrims trekked onwards, exploring a long, downwards descending tunnel, but its decline was almost indiscernible to the seemingly lost wanderers of the catacomb. Faustus, mumbling some kind of prayer, unhesitatingly followed the others blindly as they made their way through the empty darkness. Hecatrea at the crossroads, the drippings from the ceiling, and the stalactites, was making the ground increasingly wet and slippery. The rocky walls were damp, blanketed in black mold, and the toxic mycotoxins in the air were causing a burning sensation in the mucous membranes of the small group as they moved through it. Their sinuses and lungs were inflamed, runny, itchy, and they were all having difficulty in breathing, enduring paroxystic respiratory distress and coughing blood. "I hate this place," said Azelma, spitting out bloody sputum. Their eyes were bloodshot and jaundiced, sore, their vision began to blur, and their skin, especially the hairy areas like their groins and armpits, was crawling with rash. They all were experiencing malaise, fatigue, pain in their joints and abdomens, and feverish nausea. "It's the unseen spores," croaked Faustus, "which is making us sick. We have to get out of this awful place." Epiphanes answered, saying, "We'll be out of it soon enough." Faustus though was thinking that they had jumped from the frying pan into the fire, and he mumbled incidite in cilium cupiens videre caribidim. Azelma barked at him, "What's that supposed to mean, motherfucker?" Desatta laughed, "He said that he runs on Scylla, wishing to avoid Charybdis." Epiphanes cursed, "Quit blubbering gibberish, you two, your philosophy isn't helping us here at all." Desatta continued laughing, "Wasn't it you who said that what we can't see can't hurt us, Epiphanes dearest?" "Shut up," she snapped at him. The path they had been following suddenly emptied, at last, into a dark cavern, in the midst of which was a slime-covered pillar surrounded by fetid, mist-covered sludge. The pillar had been carved into a graven image of the triple goddess Hecate, 3 female forms, each holding 2 stone torches, and wearing luxurious sacred peplos, and each looking down one of 3 jagged conduits opened in the cavern wall. One of her forms had a horse-like face, another a snake-like face, and the third a boar-like face. All this was made visible not so much by Epiphanes' torch but because of crystal-clear and translucent quartz which acted as the flames of the stone torches, and as the eyes of the goddess' faces. Thus, the humble flickering light cast by her torch was reflected and magnified and transformed into a kaleidoscopic light show filling the entire cavern. Faustus sighed heavily, rubbing his eye. "What the hell are those things?" Sybaris and the Lamia child-eating, fork-tongued Lamia, beautiful breasted women with serpents' bodies and humanoid torsos and arms ending in clawed fingers, their faces distorted, having dark snake eyes, with no discernible eyelids, which were ever open, and weeping, which had been slithering around in the darkness of the cavern, were illuminated now. Each had 4 venom-dripping fangs, 2 in the top and 2 in the bottom of their snake-like mouths. They were all between 9 and 11 feet long, and capable of raising upright off the ground. Some of the lamia were in the opening stages of molting their reptilian skin from the waist below. The eyes of these were cloudy and blue, and, meandering in the darkness, these paid no attention to the wayfarers, but the others, having yellow eyes with black vertical slits for pupils, were aware of and keenly interested in the 4 mortal souls which had stumbled into their midst. The lamia's black, slippery-looking, forked tongues waved and oscillated, flicking in and out of their scaled mouths, smelling the invisible chemicals in the air around them. But these serpentines were also able to feel vibrations through their soft underbellies, as they slithered around. "These are the ghosts of dead women," whispered Azelma. "The undead daughters of the witch Hecatsoteira, the Virgin. These reptilian horrors prey upon mortals," said Desada, "but they prefer the blood of infants and children." "Don't look them directly in the eyes," said Epiphanes. "Their hypnotic stare will turn your blood to stone, you'll be entranced forever in terror." "Look at your feet and be humble," Azelma commanded. "God damn it, because I'm not giving you another blow job, asshole." Faustus did as he was told, and turned his gaze and his thoughts inward, reflecting on the wetness of the girl's mouth and softness of its kisses. He licked his lips. "We can either go back the way we have come," said Epiphanes, "or we can go on, down one of these 2 paths." Faustus asked, "But which one? Where do they go?" "One thing is certain, monsieur," responded Desada, "one of these paths lead to where we want to go, and the other does not." "But which path should we take?" Faustus said, "Both paths are exactly same, dismal, dark, and gloomy, foreboding." Occult sigils had been hewn into the walls between each of the 3 pathways, but they were made illegible by the slimy gunk oozing over the rough rock walls. Faustus tried to wipe the mawkish glop away, but just sludged the turbid residue, making his hands sticky with the stinking, foul mess. But even if he could have cleaned the writing well enough to read it, he couldn't have read it because it had been written in a long-dead alien tongue. The Lamia Queen Sybaris forthwith emerged from out of one of the craggy tunnels, an exceptionally powerful and beautiful, scaly-winged Drychina with wild red hair. She was huge and savage in appearance, a monstrous creature with raptor-like talons and poisonous breath, guilty of terrible violence, and to meet her meant doom and death for any mortal. And with her were her attendants, the more Melisiac sister witches, Mero, Panthea, and Pamphila. These 3 antiquated hags of Sybaris Coven had wrinkled skin, one being white, another black, the third grey covered in pimples and warts, and had long claw-like fingernails. Sybaris was smiling as stone, emanating colder feelings than ice in hell. The horrible harpies carried in a struggling man with an ornamental flaked flint dagger. Mero thrust her right hand into the wound, as a hideous howling broke forth from the man, delving down into his innards and digging up his viscera. Then nameless sounds vied with his morbid shrieking, and, as she was withdrawing the poor unfortunate's still beating heart, a whistling sigh occurred, and, as Panthea slit his throat, his voice, or rather, an inarticulate gurgle emerged with the air, his last breath, and Pamphila forced open his mouth, as he thus died, and tore out his tongue. These were presented to Sybaris, who took them up one into each of her hands. Sybaris left them no alternative as to which direction they should choose, leaving them only the one option, to flee back the way they came, or to take the other path. They wandered into a chamber illuminated by a strange glowing crystal clear pool of clean-smelling water, with a statue of the Naiad Samacis sitting in it, pregnant, combing her hair and gazing lovingly at her reflection. Scattered around the pond were men castrating themselves, cutting off their penises and testicles with sharp stones, and women were cutting off their breasts in a wild, uncontrollable frenzy. Desada said, "Any man who drinks from this fount is made effeminate and driven mad. The women, too, are driven mad, as you can see." Between the way they entered, and the exit opposite them, on either side were two statues surrounded by piles of bones and rotting corpses, a breasted Phrygian Agdistis, holding her severed genitals, and the Greek Hermaphroditus, each had both male and female genitalia and a woman's breasts. 9 naked Corybants stamped their feet and pounded drums and danced around, the floor slippery with blood and littered with lumps of meat that had once been breasts or testicles or penises. The wailing of the Galli was disparaging. And other wraith-like souls drawn inexplicably towards the tangled bodies of the orgiastic legion, weary of the persistent boredom of life with the grottos of the bordello. Our tale continues whence Faustus encounters the sorority of the bad women.